A very warm welcome to all of you to this event, Future of Our Grids, Accelerating Europe's Energy Transition. My name's David Rose, and I'll be guiding you through today's proceedings. Now, on behalf of ENTSO-E, I want to welcome, in particular, the European Commissioner for Energy. I'd like to welcome the Spanish EU Presidency, and I would like to welcome all of you here in the room, our distinguished participants and industry leaders. Now, today, we're clearly going to embark on a little bit of a short journey together relating to the future of our electricity grids. That's what we're here for. We're going to explore a little bit of new territory, I believe. Clearly, we're going to recognize the progress that we've made so far, and there has been substantial progress so far. And at the same time, we're also going to focus strongly on investigating what is needed to ensure that our grids can help deliver on Europe's energy transition. So what are the objectives for the forum beyond that? Well, if you pay attention to the slide I've clicked onto here, you can see clearly we have two overarching objectives today. Firstly, to raise awareness about electricity grids and the crucial enabling role they play in facilitating an accelerated energy transition. In parallel, and equally importantly, to provide targeted inputs from the sessions that will follow, which I'll explain briefly in a moment, inputs and considerations for the ongoing EU-level policy discussions. Now, I suppose the question that we're all asking ourselves is, how are we going to do this today? Well, let me very briefly explain. So how are we going to deliver on these objectives? First, we're going to have, as we're starting now our plenary session, in a moment we'll hear our keynote speeches from the ENTSO-E Chair of the Board, from the Commissioner for Energy, and from the Spanish EU Presidency. We'll then transition with a 10-minute break for you to transfer to your rooms, which I'll direct you after, and to our two parallel thematic sessions. First on investment, and also then on regulation. Following a short coffee break for you, we'll then move into the second stage of our thematic sessions, focusing on people and procurement, and on project authorization and stakeholder engagement. These thematic sessions, of course, will provide an opportunity for all of you to provide your inputs on these key topics today. We'll then bring things together with a policy focus and concluding remarks back here in the plenary room, where we hear from the Director General of DG Energy. We will hear also from the International Energy Agency with their input, as well as also then presentation of the outputs from the thematic sessions by our moderators, and our concluding remarks from the EU DSO President, from the ENTSO-E President, and last but by no means least, again, the European Commissioner for Energy. So that's how we're going to deliver on those objectives today. So now, that's enough from me. That's my role of introducing things for you. Now I'd like to give the floor to the first of our three keynote speakers. Could we give a very warm round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, please? For Damian Cortinas, the Chairman of the Board of ENTSO-E. Over to you, Damian.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, David. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Vice President Ribera. Good morning, Commissioner Simson. I want to start, I think, on behalf of everyone in this room, to thank the European Commission and to thank the Spanish Presidency of the Council for the initiative of this conference. This is most welcome. This is very necessary. Why it is very necessary? I want to start to put a picture of why this is something that we need to do today. We as ENTSO-E, we are the association of all 39 European transmission system operators. In 2022, we published our vision, a power system for a carbon neutral Europe. With this work, the main conclusion of this work was that a power system fit for our carbon neutral Europe is within our reach. But 4 things need to change in order to make it happen. And those are, first, a market design upgraded for carbon neutrality, and we are already seeing the first steps in this direction, which are most welcome. Second, we need flexibility sources to compensate for the increased weather dependency and complexity of the system. Third, we need a coordinated operation of the systems in order to use the existing grid to its limit within secure and efficient operation. And fourth, we need to invest in grid infrastructure. This fourth condition is the topic of today, and we are very happy about it. And let's make no mistake, investments in the grids will be needed. Even if we use all the smartnets, all the digitalization, all the coordination we can have between TSOs, with other operators, even there we will need massive investments. We will need to invest to connect all the new generation into the system. We will need to invest for the solidarity between regions and countries of Europe, and in particular for the sharing of the flexibilities that we'll need tomorrow. We will need to invest, finally, simply to keep pace with the increased demand that would come with the electrification of the economy that comes with the energy transition. And when we talk about the grid, we talk about the whole grid, offshore and onshore, transmission and distribution. And we are very happy today to share this scene with our friends from the DSOs, who are also a very important part of what we are going to say. Let me give you some figures, very high-level ones. There will be others during the sessions coming from our last ENTSO-E analysis. If we take all the European countries together, we estimate we will need 220 billion euros from here to 2030 in order to accompany the energy transition. We estimate we will need 335 billion more between 2030 and 2040. If we look at offshore, when we put together all the national plans for offshore of European Union countries, we see a target of capacity of 112 gigawatts by 2030, that is almost tomorrow, and we see a target of 258 gigawatts for 2040. All this generation will need to be connected to the mainland and then transported and distributed across Europe. So again, let's make no mistake, investments will be needed. And in the analysis we all made, we see four main challenges in order to transform these investments from planning into reality, from paper into infrastructure. Those are financing, those are the regulatory framework, the supply chains and the skills that comes with it, and the social acceptability. These four topics are the four sessions that David described before, and we are going to discuss all through them. First session, we'll look at how to secure and mobilize all the financing that will be needed in order to support the new and upgraded grid infrastructure. The second session, we discuss how policy and regulation can accelerate the investment that we will need. The third one, we'll look at how the challenges that the manufacturing capability in Europe see today, again, in capability and skills, can be dealt with. And the fourth one, again, also one of the most important ones, we'll discuss how to better include local communities and public at large to foster acceptability of our grids. Let us all be clear today. Without the necessary investments in the grid, the energy transition will simply not happen. Today, we have in this room all the major decision makers on this key issue. Executives from the whole electricity industry, regulatory authorities, member states, and the European Commission. We thank you all for being here today. And now, let's make this conference the start of a journey that will unlock a power grid fit for our carbon neutral future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Damian, and a clear call to action there at the end. So let's move without further ado straight on to the second of our three interventions to start things off today. Could we again, with a very warm, and I use the word warm here, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully the room's not too warm, a warm round of applause to welcome to the stage, please, the European Commissioner for Energy, Kadri Simson. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear Teresa, dear Damian, I'm very pleased to be here with you and to stay with you for all this morning. Let me start by thanking President Boldiš and Secretary General Toig and ENTSO-E for doing such a great job organizing today's event. Another big thanks to ACER, the EU DSO entity, and EIB, and the other partners for their support in making today happen. A high-level dedicated forum on European grids was not on anyone's agenda this year, up until 2 months ago. The past year and a half has been one of the most turbulent and volatile times for Europe's energy system, I can say, in recent history. Responding to the energy crisis required so much of our attention and time. But there is one moment that really stands out in my memory. On the 23rd of February last year, Ukraine disconnected from the Russian-operated electricity grid. And just a few hours later, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And many believed that Ukraine's act of energy independence would be short-lived. But over a fortnight later, a fully synchronized with the continental European grid, they did that, and it worked. This kept Ukraine's electricity system stable, its homes warm and lights on even at the darkest hours of the winter. And it also meant that Ukraine is now interconnected with over 400 million consumers in 24 countries, most of which are in the EU. And I wanted to start with this historic milestone because we all must be grateful to ENTSO-E and the European DSOs for this incredible achievement. But also because this story underlines the importance of our electricity grid. Grids are at the core of the energy system. Power generators, transmission and distribution lines all working together to deliver energy to millions of consumers across our continent. Not only that, the synchronization of Ukraine also shows that grids are a matter of geopolitical importance. Europe has a dense network of 11 million kilometers. Our electricity grid is more resilient and flexible than any system across the globe. With the 10E regulation, we also have one of the most advanced and sophisticated frameworks for planning and developing cross-border network connecting member states. Grids are a true European success story. Success story of integration, cooperation, and mutual support. It's something to be proud of. But right now, we stand at a crucial juncture. On the one hand, under the revised Renewable Energy Directive, we have ambitious binding renewable energy targets for the Union of 42.5% by 2030, with an aspiration even higher to reach 45. We are seeing electricity demand growing fast in the coming years and supply of clean energy booming across Europe. This is good news. It's key to us achieving our climate neutrality and long-term energy sovereignty. On the other hand, we need to ensure that this clean energy is being delivered in homes and businesses across the EU. We need our networks to integrate the largest share of reliable, clean power. We need our grids to become more able to connect millions of active consumers. Thanks to the multiplication of solar and rooftop PVs, electric vehicles and energy communities, this power is coming online. We need our grids to be more resilient to weather-related shocks and better protected from cyber threats. However, as we speak, the pressure on our power infrastructure is palpable. I don't want to dwell too long on the challenges. We all know them very well. Whether it's a long waiting times renewable generation projects face to connect to grids, the grid congestion, the disruptions along the entire supply chain, or the impact of inflation and rising interest rates on new projects. Over the past months, I have had plenty of discussions with many of you around these issues. And the conclusion is very simple. Without a power network fit for purpose, we will not achieve our REPower EU goal to replace Russian fossil fuels, nor will we reach our net zero targets. That's why I want to thank once again organizers of this event, because the very moment when I went to President Boldiš and ENTSO-E, we worked together on the idea to broad this topic at high level. Because our grids are an incredible asset, and we need them to keep pace with the changing energy environment. And we need solutions to turn a potential barrier into a powerful enabler of the clean energy transition, solutions to make our grid stronger, more digital, cyber-proof and resilient. And going forward, this will require changing gear in different areas. The first one is investment. Europe needs to invest 584 billion euros by 2030 to modernize and expand its grids. This is huge. But we actually can get there. In July, the EIB increased financing by 50% to 45 billion euros until 2027 under its Repower EU Plus initiative. And this is expected to mobilize over 150 billion euros in new green investments. The EIB can be an even stronger partner for investors and industry in green projects. Imagine what we could achieve if we develop new financial instruments and solutions beyond the classic long-term investments. The proposed new electricity market reform will also make a difference. We expect it to change remuneration mechanism for green projects and boost anticipatory investments. So I am urging member states to make progress as soon as possible. We need the investment security and the new rules in place by the end of this year. Second, imagine what we could achieve if we further break down regulatory barriers. Let's take the issue of permitting and authorization. Last year's energy legislation that came due to the emergency is already helping authorize new renewable projects faster. It extends to the necessary grid connections. And imagine if this could also apply to all transmission projects, so they are fast-tracked without cutting corners on environmental safeguards. Imagine, too, if we were able to develop new ways to involve and bring on board local communities to ensure support for new grid connections. And by 2030, Europe is to deploy around 111 gigawatt of offshore wind energy, and by 2050, around 317 gigawatts. And these are the highest offshore targets right now in the world. Imagine the impact if we can smoothly integrate offshore wind assets into the onshore grids. Third, the crisis has clearly shown the importance of cross-border interconnections. Europe stands to gain so much if we revitalize regional cooperation and make progress on cross-border interconnections. ENTSO-E's latest 10-year network development plan, 2022, shows how Europe needs to invest 6 billion per year up to 2040 in cross-border infrastructure. The 15% interconnection target, like in the Iberian Peninsula, is not just a benchmark. It is the best way to further bolster our security of supply and competitiveness. Fourth, we need to have more efficient grids by digitalizing our energy system and investing in smart grids. With increasing shares of solar and wind, it's become more important to match demand and supply. And this requires real-time data and price signals, allowing consumers, businesses, and smart energy appliances to respond to the system needs. Fifth, we need to seize industrial and commercial opportunities for grids. We all read the reports of projects delayed or suspended because waiting times for components may go beyond 2030, or because of rising costs. But let's not forget that the 3 largest cable manufacturers in the world are based here in Europe. If we were able to boost our industrial capacity, expand the pool of skilled labor, improve supply chain, all of this would turn into jobs, growth, opportunities. That's why we recently put forward a proposal for a net zero industry act. And this will support cable manufacturing along with other clean technologies for our domestic and export markets. By 2030, 80 million kilometers of new grids will be needed worldwide. It is an opportunity to grasp for Europe's industrial manufacturer. Dear colleagues, over the course of this morning, I'm sure we will discuss all of this and much more. From the US to India, from Brazil to China, everyone is coming to terms with the strategic relevance of grids. Everyone is struggling with similar challenges of expansion and upgrading, permitting, and financing. As Europe, we must tackle this challenge head on. And today's conference is just the beginning. It is a way to bring together policymakers, regulators, investors, and industry. Today we can move the grids debate center stage to seek together new solutions and ideas. And we are planting a seed, and we'll have an opportunity to take this forward at the PCI days already in November and at the Copenhagen Forum next year. It is work that will continue beyond this Commission's mandate and bear fruit in years to come. I will be with you throughout this day, and I will join some workshops, discussions, and I will conclude later on. And I'm very happy now to give the floor to Minister Ribera. Teresa, you are very welcome.
Clear acknowledgement of challenges. No, please, Teresa, do rest with us. Clear outline of challenges and also ways forward and ways of addressing those challenges. May I introduce you formally, Teresa?
Please.
I would like to formally introduce, ladies and gentlemen, the third Vice President of the Government of Spain and Minister for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge, representing the Spanish Presidency. Warm round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen. For Teresa Ribera Rodriguez. Teresa.
Thank you so much. And I take note that formal introduction means an applause, which is fantastic. Thank you so much, dear Commissioner, dear Presidents and CEOs, dear friends. I am very happy to be here with you this morning for something which is very, very important. Quite relevant in policy terms, but quite relevant also as an opportunity to build a much more progressive and prosperous Europe. Many of you may remember Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, some years ago stated in a speech talking about climate finance and climate action and its impact on the economy, talking about the tragedy of the horizon. And I hope, even if you are in the horizon, this does not become a tragedy. But his main message was, if we want to avoid a tragedy, we need to take action and to orientate our decisions right now. This is why it is so important that you take the time, and we take the time, to have proper conversations on how we can improve the capacity to invest and to take the right decisions alongside the four main issues that Damian has introduced that are pretty important for the conversations to have in the coming months. What about the people? What about the regulation? What about the investment? What about the supply chain? Supply chain, which is not only cables, but many other things, including electronics, equipments, and materials. I have to say that this is something that it is not new for us in Spain. Almost 20 years ago, we decided that we were going to challenge to see to what extent the grid was able to go beyond what it was supposed to accept as an integration of a big share of renewable energy within the system. And of course, it was quite a big challenge for all the people working in Red Eléctrica, and it required a huge investment in our capacities to monitor and to be sure that the quality of the service was quite good, as it was expected to be. And I think that it was a great success, and we learned a lot. It was an almost isolated system for the reasons that the Commissioner was commenting some minutes ago. We knew that we were going towards something that would require to understand how the small capacity to generate power with the great installations used to generate power could work together within the system, how we could be sure that there was a capacity to back up, and to what extent the grid itself could be a kind of a storage system that could work even better if the system was larger than if it was smaller. Since then, there have been many things happening around, and there is an increased understanding from governments and regulators on the critical importance to invest on grids, both distribution and transmission grids, but also in the skills that we require to people in order to be sure that this is still going to be a success story, full of opportunities and challenges. It represents a great impact on the decisions to be taken around the energy transition. We want to build an energy system based on efficiency and improvements of the demand management, electrification to ensure the decarbonization in the final consumption of energy, with a high share of renewable energy, facilitating innovation and reducing dependencies from abroad, and reliable. So thinking about the storage solutions that we need to put in place, deploying a more flexible and secure energy system. And all this means innovation, different needs which also impact on the management of the grids and security requirements. But as I said, it also implies new skills. I agree with all of you when you say we need to be proud, because we have good reasons to be proud of what it has been going on in Europe. We are at the forefront of climate ambition, but we are also at the forefront on the improvements and developments in the new energy solutions, including grids. And we are providing a successful response to how we should accelerate the energy transition and electrification of our economies. We know that this is a great opportunity, so this positive horizon that was quoted by Mark Carney. But at the same time, we know that there are high expectations on each of us coming from an average citizen, an average industry, an average business in Europe and elsewhere. We are well positioned, and you are the very best players to know what we need and what we have learned in the recent years. Renewable electricity, along with other new energy vectors such as hydrogen and renewable gases, will be at the cornerstone of the global energy policy for a long while. But grids, infrastructure, to be sure that this works perfectly well, will also be part of the equation. Investments, as you have already said, are huge. We need to be confident, but we need to be trustful for those taking decisions on investments. Grids, both in transmission and distribution, will increasingly be synonymous to supply security and the possibility of integrating new technologies and to ensure that the energy transition takes place. This means changes in the way we plan grids for both transportation and distribution, considering scenarios that go up to 100% renewable supply from now on. The transmission and distribution grids are the corridors that allow or limit the opportunities of this transformation, of this revolution. Therefore, planning processes should be sound and fast, but also their grid operators have to be as smart as possible to ensure that these opportunities can be achievable. In addition, yes, we need interconnections. We need interconnections, and we have experienced along the last year to what extent this is a very important response whenever there is a crisis, wherever the crisis is. That provides flexibility, security, and efficiency in the use of the infrastructure. That provides a channel to ensure that complementarity among our countries can be used and benefit all the citizens around Europe. Energy policy and new governance in the energy transition must gain relevance and policy coordination within the European Union. And I would say that this does not have to be perceived as a threat, but as a great opportunity to build more Europe, to build more cooperation, to enjoy a much more fruitful European values, European alliance. Many countries are now investing in renewable resources and infrastructures that may end up being consumed in other countries. Are we ready to ensure that this is possible? This will require a robust institutional setup and European coordination, and we have the grounds where we can build this building. Integration of our international electricity market through the development of cross-border interconnections is crucial to ensure the adequate performance of renewable energies, security of supply, a level playing field, affordable and stable electricity prices throughout the European Union. And I think that this is, as you say, within reach. European Union wants to reduce their own dependencies in terms of energy, raw materials, and industrial value chains. So it is also important to go beyond this energy perspective and to understand to what extent this is a crucial, relevant cornerstone for the industrialization, reindustrialization, and new opportunities for new industry services and business all along Europe. To do this, we need robust infrastructure, affordable and predictable prices. Invest in innovation, thinking in new alternative raw materials. Summing up, this is a win-win situation for all, or a risk-defeat resulted in a missed opportunity for the whole European Union. And we know very well where we want to be. Not a tragedy, but a fantastic horizon for all. So there are still many questions, and probably this is part of the exercise today, how to respond to these questions. There are many roles that have been functioning for any operator of the transmission or distribution system that will be reinforced or will change a little bit or widening a lot. We know most of them, but some of them become new challenges. We know that we need to think in terms of storage solutions, security of supply, smart demand management, integration of increasing renewable energies installed capacity, management and anticipation of the future offshore, present and future offshore wind installed capacity and submarine grids, adaptation to hydrogen requirements and complementarities between the different TSOs and DSOs, but also thinking on what type of coordination this could mean for the governance of the new map of Europe. Innovation and improvements in the use of the built infrastructures is also a must, and you have been working on that for a long while, but you will have to work even harder. Someone said once that telecom could not have developed so quickly if they had remained inspired by the physical enlargement, full stop. This is something that we also need to integrate much further in the development, in the enlargement of our own infrastructures for electricity transmission and distribution. It may be right or wrong, but there are many questions that are still relevant. What innovations worth the efforts to increase the productivity of the materials and infrastructure that do already exist? What bottlenecks in supply chains? How to improve the use of the existing infrastructures? How to ensure that people do support new infrastructures or changes in the existing ones? How to address the relative low use of these capacities along Europe through a much more standardized approach to its security commitments, its requirements of quality of supply. How integrate digital performance and become what you are already, a 21st key player for the economy. Which partners are the key partners to do so? What type of regulation could facilitate this transformation at the right speed? What are the risks that the electricity grid face vis-à-vis the impact of climate change? How can they be better adapted to extreme weather events? What changes in the offer and demand? What new materials are needed to extreme temperatures of heavier storms? How to ensure that they require investments to respond to the development and the adaptation of the new functions take place? how the social demand to keep working on the functioning with the unaffordable limits and the expectations of investors. What type of skills we need to invest in? People will always be key. It happens that I am also Minister of Environment, and I can assure you that when talking about permitting, which is, of course, a critical point in this conversation, we always feel that the main problem is not what we publish in an official, paper, journal, but how people on the ground feel about the new infrastructure. So social support, social engagement, explanation, implication of the territories is absolutely key. Understanding the benefits of what we do is the very relevant barrier that we need to overcome. Without public acceptance, we risk failing to achieve the goals of the energy transition. With the public engagement, with the employment, with the innovation, with the aspiration to build a much more better future, we can go far ago. Thank you so much. I'm waiting for your very smart answers to all these questions around these 4 groups of themes for discussion. And again, I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of all my colleagues in the Council of Energy. You can count on your governments, you can count on the European Union to build a much more better Europe. Thank you.
So we transition now rapidly, ladies and gentlemen, into having the conclusions from our thematic sessions. We'll take them in sequential numerical order, which is no message of any kind about relative priority or importance. They are all equally equal, I note. And with this, I will hand over to the first of our presenters, Peter Vermaat, the Secretary General of DSO Entity, for session 1. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause, please.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon to every one of you. A lot of known faces and new faces. It's a pleasure to be here with so many people to bring the grids forward. And what did we do in session 1? The key question in session 1 was how to secure investment for the future-proof sustainable energy system grids. And before we went into an interaction with the audience, we put a little bit of framing from the DSO perspective. So we shared the need for growth, we shared the numbers, they have been around today, and obviously for TSOs there is a massive investment both onshore and offshore. For DSOs, well, you can imagine a bit different. We do business onshore only, but it was nice perhaps to compare the figures, because not everybody is aware that the investments of the DSOs are 3 to 4 times higher than the TSO investments onshore, right? So not the offshore part, but it illustrates, I think, the decentralized nature of the energy transition. And also it illustrates that the investments in the DSO grid are getting close to the consumer to empower the consumer to deploy flexibility, to connect all heat pumps and solar PV and whatever is necessary to have all resources sustainable. And after a very nice contribution from 3 expert speakers on many dimensions of this question, we had a nice exchange. And I think that looking back, we can wrap that up in 5 sort of bullets, 5 areas of conclusions. The first one, we shared the importance to have the grids at the center of the attention. Not only because we are serving households or industry, but in fact the wide service to society in all aspects of society require good grids. It was a pleasure to note that everybody is aware that we can be happy of the performance of the grids in the past and the present, right? It was remembered also earlier today that even in a big crisis, the grids were sustainable and reliable in their performance. And let's not forget about that. When we change the grid, we do it in a system that is fully in operation. Now, based on that, it was also clear that the increase in sustainable resources, in heat pumps, in electric vehicles, requires that anticipatory investments are necessary. It's not need only, but also only anticipation. The grids simply need to be ready. Then the third area, when looking at that and based on that, where you need to do anticipatory investments, and if you look at the growth rate of investments, that will require a forward-looking regulation. So we need to work on that together to accommodate the rapid growth, so that the forward-looking perspective can be financed by the companies. But also it's important that we have a bit of intelligent adaptability, because we can see that plans will change and we need to be able to adapt to that either from the company or the financing. The fourth area you can give the title of connecting regulation and financial markets. So from what I said before, it's really important that we use all sources of financing, all instruments we have there. It was very nicely illustrated by EIB, equity, loans, funds, EU funding. And it's also important that we remove barriers for smaller companies. Mostly TSOs are quite a sizable company, but for DSOs, you must imagine that we are talking about, well, up to 2,000 of companies even, from very small to very large, and sometimes barriers emerge for the smaller companies to step up in the investment capacity. Fifth area, closely related to that, we need to connect to the financial markets in a way that the understanding of the regulatory system is more clear, so that efficient risk allocation can be done and that the rating is adequate to facilitate efficient funding, so that the rating is tuning into the risk profile of the companies. Last but not least, we shared that it's not only necessary to invest in the grids, but we also need to invest in the entire value chain, producing equipment, producing cables, substations. Everything in the chain of the energy needs to step up. All of this was shared, I think, in a very energetic, hopeful spirit, also looking forward to, for instance, using this call for action also for further exploration in the Copenhagen Forum or any other track that we can think of together. Thank you very much. This was the summary for session 1, and I hand over to session 2 through David. Thank you.
And without further ado, I'll hand over to the Director of ACER, Christian Zinglersen. Over to you, please.
So I'll take over where Peter left off. Sonia and I had the pleasure of co-moderating session 2, where we deliberately set out to put differences on the table so we don't have a long enumeration of topics in the spirit of a good, cordial talk, but more to get a few divergences on the table. And I think we got some consensus items and a few differences of opinion as well. My summary will be in 2 parts. I will have 5 sort of broader, let's call it high-level type impressions, and then I will have 7 or 8 more concrete examples as such under those headlines, as it were. So in the first bucket of sort of broader high-level impressions was, I think, broadly shared by all. We are not in an incremental mode. We are in a different type of mode, and so we need to do things differently. It is not the same approach or the same mechanisms. Some spoke a bit of the risk of discontinuity, and therefore we need to recalibrate the different wheels, as it were. At the same time, let's not throw all the babies out with the bathwater. There are things that work, and let's not overreach and extend in terms of the reform zeal. Second high-level impression that I would bring is that implementation remains key. Some pointed to the clean energy package actually still being in force as such, but not being fully implemented everywhere. So in the appropriate eager to adopt new tools and processes and measures, let's not forget that there is an implementation challenge here and there, which we also need to focus on. Third, an impression was that we are doing and discussing this in a broader context, where one key manufacturer put it that in the past, they were competing for orders. Now it seems that regulatory jurisdictions are competing to get their pipeline, as it were. So a bit of a different world. The upside being that the world seems to move in a similar direction. The downside being that there are actually significant supply chain issues and they need to be tackled as well, and they extend beyond Europe. Fourth high-level message, I'll coin what Birger said. We need toothpaste dynamics, which I think is a nice political way of framing it, which basically means we need to get the max out of what we have and the max out of what we will building. I think this was actually one of the bullets from Ukeske also in that, doing that. And that has several connotations to it in terms of demand-side response, but also benefit sharings and other aspects. And the fifth high-level impression, if you will, was that there are significant dilemmas ahead, and they are fundamentally political. And we came, I mentioned it here because we had a talk about something which arguably is a bit techy. It's cross-border cost allocation principles, yes, where we have some examples in Europe about costs lying differently from where they fall. So let's say deviating from a territorial type principle. But lo and behold, in what instances does that come up often? It's when the EU pays. It's much easier to agree on a different distribution of costs if you're not picking up the bill, if I can be a bit blunt. So one answer to that would, of course, be, well, let's increase the level of socialized funding, which is probably part of the approach. But I remember Minister Ribera also saying, maybe we're entering into a different pact. We're doing things more together. That brings up a lot of benefit sharing, but actually it also brings up a bit of cost sharing. So I wonder if the only approach there is to add zeros on the EU check, or whether we need to get into a, let's say, a more genuinely political conversation on top. Those were the 5, let's say, big high-level impressions, if you will, and I'll add a few, let's say 7 or 8, a little bit more concrete things. The first is around the notion of anticipatory investment. I think it's fairly consensual that those who are involved in approving anticipatory investment need to allow for more risk, because we're not in incremental mode, we're in an accelerated mode. So the risk appetite, if you will, from those pushing the different buttons will need to increase. That includes regulators. There is this quite distinct need to use better what we already have and to efficiently utilize that which we will soon build. As mentioned, this has a demand-side response activation component where we're far from there yet, benefit sharing components, technology, digitalization component, etc. Third, we of course all agree that permitting needs to be less delayed, as it were, and steps have been taken in that respect. But it's a multifaceted issue. It's not just about speed, it's also about residual risk. So to what extent can part of the acceleration of permitting be delayed to be linked to who picks up the risk in case of delay, the delay which we are trying not to have, but in case it were to happen, who carries the risk? And maybe some reform needs to happen there. With the echoing, a bit like what Keske's slide was showing, that the smaller voltage levels are, let's say, easier to expedite than the higher voltage level new build. Fourthly, broadly consensual, I took that this is a long-term path we have ahead, and therefore maybe the planning horizon needs to extend beyond 5-10 years. Maybe it needs to go beyond. That is sort of the time frame that has that implication, but it also had implications in terms of planning governance, because the field of stakeholders today may look different 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. So it needs to be an inclusive planning type process. Then fifth, if I can check my notes here, yeah. There is a link, Peter actually links to what I think you brought out as well. There is a link to the new financial environment. And the rate of return needs to match. But of course, if borrowing costs increase, then let's say, that needs to be reflected in the rate of return decisions ultimately taken. So there is an element there of, let's say, keeping up to date with the new financial environment, which is a bit similar to what you said. Sixth, there is a recognition that under the broader efficiency enhancement headline, there is a need to scale, to standardize, and therefore also replicate. And that can be industry-led, but it's probably also involves different parts of industry to get that going. Seventh, and I think that will conclude, a number of, let's say, more concrete examples of things to enhance, drawing on some concrete positive examples in some jurisdictions across Europe, have grid capacity overview, much more visibility on grid capacity and the lack thereof. That will make the different chains, the links in the chain function better. Flexibility needs to be assessed holistically, relates to market design discussions, etc. There needs to be coordinated flexibility needs assessment. The value in combining different technologies, where one interconnection can actually incorporate different technology solutions, which also be an efficiency enhancer, and issues around connecting queue reform, which is prioritized heavily in some member states, but not so much in all. That would be the seventh concretization in addition to these 5 broader high-level type impressions, which I would bring back, and we'll try to put something together on paper in the next days or so and make that available in due course. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. As Christian alluded to, ladies and gentlemen, you may already be aware the conclusions from the sessions will be published on the event website subsequent to the event in the coming period for you to obviously to see in more detail. And without further ado, let's move on to the third of our 4 reportings now from the thematic sessions. The chairman of the board from ENTSO-E, Damian Cortinas, giving us the outputs of session 3. Can we give him a round of applause, please?
Thank you, David. Third session was supply chains and skills. If you remember the introduction this morning, really one of the key issues that we need to address. We have had an extremely interesting session with a huge number of interventions from equipment providers and from electricity grid operators. And it is going to be difficult to extract the richness of what was there. So this is something we will keep for the detailed conclusions that will come. But there are a number of things that I think are important to point out now when we do this assessment. First of all, this idea that Europe needs, and already has, a vision on what is going to be needed. And we already have a regulatory framework that is being put in place to help with the challenges we have there, even if clearly today this is not enough, and this will need to go further than it is today. It has already been clearly said from the beginning that technology by itself is not really an issue. We have the technology we need to address the materials and the people that will be needed in order to be there. But it is clear, and this was a clear expression, I think, for all grid operators that talked at this session, that there are clear bottlenecks today in the system. Bottlenecks, which means that when we need material to be delivered, simply takes a lot of time, or it's not there, or needs some kind of strategies that operators are putting in place that are clearly not the best way to address the energy transition in order to have the materials we need to build the infrastructure. To address these bottlenecks, there are a number of challenges. And I think I can be fair when I say that what technology providers mostly expect, in particularly from grid operators, but also from regulatory authorities, can be summarized in several key points. First of all, they want us to address the whole grid. Transmission, distribution, and even some of them talked about the final consumers on the electrification of the economy. For them, this is a key issue, and it is clear that for us and the cooperation we are having today between TSOs and TSOs at national and European level should be one of the keys to address this need to have an overall view. Equipment producers are asking for more visibility. Visibility about what will be need to produce in order to have the materials we need. And visibility means commitments and having an idea for the long term. Long term being very different between distribution and transmission, but this is something that clearly is today expected from grid operators. Another thing that is expected is standardization. Standardization means 2 different things, but I think they are both part of the equation. The standards by themselves that follow a procedure by standardization bodies with everything that comes with it, but also simply standards on the way we buy things, on the way we have procedures. Some of the equipments we're talking about working in a country with a significant number of TSOs and DSOs and having to handle hundreds of different procedures in order to be able to do it. These are clearly some things that we as grid operators can work on. A number of TSOs and DSOs are already doing that. And I think you know which they are. They are already having long-term planning about what needs to be done. They are providing visibility about what needs to be bought. They are also working on way to have standard procedures. In the European arena, we think that ENTSO-E, with our DSO friends, this is something we can work on as well to see how can provide this visibility. But what is also clear is that in front of that, grid operators will need commitment also from the manufacturing companies so that the bottlenecks will be solved, that the manufacturing capacity will be there, that the skills will be developed, that we will be able to have the materials we need to build the grids that needs to be built for the energy transition. One of the things that also came very clearly of this debate on the challenges is the issue that becomes very clearly very political, but it needs to be on the table, is the level playing field. As one of them was putting it, today, when they go to the United States, they have the Buy American Act. It's difficult to go there. When they go to China, it's completely closed. It's not the same in Europe. Grid operators also were talking about the social dimension of this. One of the keys for the acceptability of the infrastructure we need to put there is this fact that this is going to serve the European economy. And not only through the electricity grid itself, but also the European economy at large by the jobs that will be there. There is clearly a tension there that needs to be solved between this idea that we have a very important amount of European money going into that. How can it benefit the whole European economy on the one side? On the other side, also remarks, we have some of the biggest global manufacturers of equipment today in Europe. They have global supply chains. They need also to be able to leverage them. There is a tension there, but that will need to be solved because I think both are legitimate and both are things that need to be part of the equation. This last aspect is clearly a regulatory aspect, or even I would say a political aspect more than regulatory, needs to be addressed. There were also some other ideas on regulatory improvements that would need to be made. Always the issue of simplifying permitting, even if, again, a lot of things have already been done in this direction. And some examples, for instance, on the raw material acts, it seems that aluminum is not part of it, and 70% of the material for distribution networks is aluminum, for instance, to give you one of the examples. There are some regulatory tweaks, some regulatory improvements that need to be there, and this is also something we need to work with the regulatory authorities, how to put it out there. And I would say finally, because finally is not because it's less important, because probably it's something that comes on top of all of that, there is the issue of the people that comes behind that. Today, there is a shortage of people having the right skills for the manufacturing, for operate. We are in the whole industry, in the whole value chain today, we are looking after the same type of engineers, the same type of technicians, and today we do not have enough in Europe. This is clearly a job growth opportunity for the next 30 years. But today, the fact is that a lot of our young people do not see this as a sexy career. This is something we need to work on, because clearly it's part of the solution. Clearly it is, and we shouldn't fight among ourselves to have the resources. We should promote the jobs, the high-quality jobs that will come for working for the whole industry. This is also a very important part of the equation that needs to be addressed. I would say as a preliminary conclusion on this topic, this is clearly a topic that has not one solution and not one single part of the value chain that can solve it. The key here would be collaboration, cooperation, different forms. We have a whole value chain here. We have to be proud of what we have in Europe today, from the manufacturing to the operation to the way we implement the different things. There is a clear call to concrete action. And even if there is one of the topics that probably leads itself for this very engineering concept of an action plan, it is this one. This is something we need to continue working probably from next week to see how we tackle the issues that we have ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Damian. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, keeping an eye on time, I give the floor to the last of our four reporters from the sessions, the CEO of the Renewables Grid Initiative, Antonella Battaglini. Antonella, please. Can we give her a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen?
Thank you very much. So in session 4, we basically address two topics. One is how do we accelerate permitting, and the other, how do we deal with public opposition on the ground? So how do we engage local stakeholders? I will tackle first the permitting, the speeding up of the permitting, because we concluded that a lot of the regulation that we need is already in place. We need to implement it. We need to implement it at national level and local level. This will require staffing, permitting authorities, but will also require coherence between the EU targets and the national targets, so that national regulators have very clear mandate on what to support and what not. One example from the DSO's world has been also that it is helpful, not only for the permitting, but also on the ground, bundling permitting proposal. So we will take this into consideration later on. Now, how do we deal with public opposition? It is great that it is on the table. I think between yesterday evening and today, most of the actors here are convinced that we cannot deliver the energy infrastructure that is needed without the support of the people. And therefore, this has taken most of the time during the debate. And we concluded that building grids is not only about facts, but also, and probably even more, about emotion. You may remember some weeks ago on The Economist front page, there was hug pylons, not trees. I would like to stress that if we want to engage local communities, we need to understand why they oppose. And understanding why they oppose, it has been discussed, require a dialogue. Doesn't mean doubling consultations, not at all. Doesn't mean prolonging consultation, absolutely not. But having a dialogue, answering the questions, trusting and providing, showing respect to the communities. Why this is necessary? Because benefits and impacts do not, they are not evenly distributed. You will see when building grids alone is a benefit from a social point of view, but a lot of the impacts are actually taking place in those communities, in those often rural areas where few people live and where the benefits are not really perceived. So we need to find ways to recognize also in the investments that we do that these local communities need to receive something back. It's about a just transition, it's a fair transition. And so we need to keep this in mind. Speeding up does not mean reducing the quality of the project or reducing the quality of the assessments and the engagement processes. It is about adding efficiency to the processes. So it was suggested that doing a robust strategic environmental assessments help speeding up because it provides knowledge. Also, talking to communities is not a waste of time because in the communities, it's where knowledge is, the local knowledge, that can help delivering and designing better projects. So trust is a long-term effort, and we need to invest. There's been talked a lot about anticipatory investments. Let's accept that anticipatory investments are also needed in terms of communication and engagement. I would like to mention one more thing, is that each transition, each change brings anxiety. Some people think that we are going too fast and others that we are not going fast enough. But these also bring tensions in society. And only through a dialogue and trustful relationship we can address this. Finally, communication. We need to communicate all together. It's not possible that you say A, you say B, and citizens get confused. We need the backing of policymakers, of governments, a clear mandate for energy regulators, permitting authority, the courage to take decisions, but also we need the industry, the entire system, energy system, have to come together in explaining and supporting grid expansion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonella. Could we just give one extra round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for the reporters from our sessions, please? I think capturing 70 minutes of dialogue and condensing it into 5 or 6 for you, I think they deserve definitely that extra applause. Now, keeping an eye on time and respecting everybody's time, let's keep moving, please. We now have our last phase of 3 final concluding sets of comments. First, from the DSO perspective, then from ENTSO-E, and then finally from the Commissioner for Energy. So without further ado, can I bring to the stage the President of DSO Entity, Vincenzo Ranieri, for his brief concluding comments, please. Thank you, Vincenzo.
Honorable guests, dear colleagues and friends, first of all, it's a pleasure and honor to be here to open the closing remarks of this highly important event that occurred today, for which I want to, first of all, warmly thank the Commission and all this team. I don't want to phrase all Dite, Mechtild, all the team that has been working to the event, but to the fact that this event has been possible. And of course, to our sister association, ENTSO-E, that organized this event, and with the high profile and with the right timing, because timing is important, especially for the topics that have been discussed today, and that, of course, that will have some other consequences in what we have to do. Of course, together we have deepened today which are the main challenges and potential concrete opportunities in order to foster the new the energy paradigm of the future, or I would say the energy paradigm of today, because we know exactly what we have to do. We know that we have to deploy and foster the new energy paradigm that see a decentralized, decarbonized, resilient, and flexible infrastructural model. And we are well aware that to have a decentralized energy system, the role of distribution system operator is key. It's a matter of acknowledgement, because we have to admit that in the last 10-year political and regulatory debate, the distribution business, distribution system was probably not well placed in the point of discussion, and it's a fact that, on the other hand, what's going on in this moment in our European continent sees a deep, strong involvement of, and stress in some way, on the distribution systems for what concern the development of the energy transition. It is estimated that 70% of the new renewable capacity by 2030 would be installed on distribution framework. And once we talk about electrification of economy, and all our mind goes to the heat pumps, to the electric vehicle, this means that there will be a huge impact on the distribution infrastructure. There is a good news. European citizens started well in advance the energy transition. The last 2 years, there was a boom of the small-scale solar PVs, but in general, small-scale renewable plants. And that means that during our discussion, European citizens kept going in increasing their involvement and their role, and even the capability of self-produce at least a portion of their energy. And they demonstrated to us that even during the shortage of Russian gas, there was a lot of concern, even in the Commission. I well remember how to deal with the winter. We'll be able to overcome the winter, and we are surprised that European citizens modified their behavior in order to decrease the consumption of gas. So, and that's the good point. This is a good starting point. What's the challenge? The challenge is to be on time and to make sure that energy transition will occur everywhere in Europe. And that's the reason why this kind of conference is placed in the right place at the right level. Because we are experiencing in some European countries, and in the session 1 emerged quite clearly with a concrete example, that some distribution system reached the maximum limit acceptable in terms of connecting new capacity. And that's an issue, because this means that we are effective as a DSO, yes. We are on time, or are we sure that we are able to accelerate the connection of new resources? No. And as also International Energy Agency confirmed, this kind of delay might be an issue not only for the achievement of the goal of the energy transition, but in a wider sense, even for the competitiveness of European economy. Damian touched this point that is not only a technical industrial discussion, but definitely a political discussion with the current commission, the new parliament necessarily has to put at the heart of the discussion. In that respect, of course, distribution network by definition is the natural platform where this kind of interaction will occur among consumers, among producers, the upcoming energy communities that hopefully will be spread around Europe. And to have this natural platform up and running and effective, we need to strengthen and to smarten the network, the grid. And therefore, Dieter was very clear talking about twin transition, because this is a huge challenge of DSOs. How to deal with this twin transition, again, being on time and be sure that each single DSOs of the 2,000 DSO in Europe, in every single country, will do that. We don't want anyhow, we have to avoid in any way that there will be some citizens that will benefit from the effect of energy transition, and there might be some other region in Europe that are not benefit. And that's the role that the entity, together with ENTSO-E as technical body, and of course, with all the participants to this conference that we have to anyhow to reach. I think that I don't want to repeat the main conclusion that were quite interesting. There are just 2 points that I want to highlight. Once we talk about smart grids, no matter then distribution and transmission, we need a smart regulation. What's the main characteristic of a smart grid? Must be flexible and must be adaptable to the context. Therefore, we need a regulatory framework that must be smart, that must be able to adapt to the scenario, that would be forward-looking. There might be also in a huge and I would say positive challenge with the system operators, might require, in exchange of huge investment or anticipatory investment, higher benefits. And there is this instrument, it's called output regulation. There are some good examples in Europe of output regulation, but still they are few and scattered. Let's find a way to be sure that this kind of framework will be spread everywhere in Europe, because once the output regulation has been implemented, result and benefits for the final consumers occurred. So that's not something new. We are not starting from scratch. That's the good news. We have concrete ideas, and even the fact that after 2 hours of discussion, there are just concrete solutions is a signal that what we have done here, we have not invented something that we didn't know. What in fact we did here today, we have strengthened our alliance. Probably that's the first time, and it's been a thank you, of course, to you to be the promoter together with the Kadri of this conference. That's the first time that the entire industry is meeting, the first time, and it's curious. We know each other in our respective works since many years, but none of us so far took the lead to be sure that we meet together and we start to strengthen our alliance. Because once we talk about supply chain, it's not only a matter of long-term perspective. Probably, and I'm talking about CEO of a large DSO, we should reconsider also the contractual model, the engagement model. We should overcome even the idea to have a short-term contract with prices and penalties. This is the old way to see the collaboration. The regulator invented 30 years ago the profit sharing. We should reconsider this kind of mechanism even in the contractual relationship that we have among us. And once we talk about permitting, it's not a matter to accelerate or streamline the permitting of networks, and then on another table we talk about streamlining permitting renewables. We strongly need to coordinate and streamline the bundled approach. And again, is something new? No. In some countries, some operators, in order to survive, invented new scheme. I can bring the example, the Italian example that I know quite well. In Italy, I finished. Just last comment. In Italy, the permitting is coordinated between DSOs and TSO. That's something that we can do. So therefore, the idea of collaboration that we launched today is something that we can even strengthen in a more practical way. Therefore, the commitment that we can take with the Commission that in 1 year's time we'll come back here to have the follow-up of the future of our grids, and starting from the seats that we put together with some ideas, I'm sure that we'll bring able not only to bring the action plan, but probably even some outcome of this action plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincenzo. So just to bring things together then, I'm going to go straight now into our next speaker, the President of ENTSO-E, Zbyněk Boldiš. Please, Zbyněk, over to you. Could we give him a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen?
So, looking at time, the lunch, and the Commissioner with her last speech of this conference, I will try to make this very brief. I must say I am very honored and very happy to see all the committed people in this room, all the activity in the sessions. And I must say that now I am very much relieved, because we have been knocking on this door and trying to unlock the importance of the grid for years. And now this is happening. So I am very happy, very touched, and very honored again. I would like to thank the Commissioner, thank the Spanish Presidency again, and thank you all for active participation in this event. It's very important, very much appreciated, and I think it's a milestone for the future. It is a very timely moment, as it was said many times, and we will be building on that. When I looked at my internal checklist of what kind of issues we should address, I must say that I'm very happy to say that in the action points, all of them are addressed. If you will find some more, I will be really eager to see them and discuss it, because I think in the umbrella of what was said, we can address all the challenges which we have. We do know the challenges, we have a vision, and we also have a consensus. This is, I think, what we can conclude today. And that's very important, because based on this, now it's up to all of us to continue to build the strategies, concrete actions, and address these challenges and structure them in the way that they will be the most efficient for speeding up the green transition. There were some topics which were highlighted and resonated during these final speeches already, and they are all in line with the vision that ENTSO-E presented and with the system of systems we are trying to build. It's about one grid, it's about perspective on planning, on permitting, on incentives, and on having enough people and skills to achieve this. And of course, standardization as one of those. So, to conclude, let me say that this was a privilege for ENTSO-E to host this event and to organize a conference and to foster this very constructive discussions, because that's one of the DNAs of ENTSO-E, to provide balance and to provide connection. And I hope this was something that was very well achieved today. So your input was very much appreciated. We are now moving towards the future of the system of systems. We are moving to make these things happen on all the levels, across all the sectors. So I'm very much looking for the final outcomes of this conference. They will be transformed into takeaways, which could serve as a very good basis for specific actions, for specific strategies, for specific action plans. And I believe this was a very good and successful step of our journey that is now accomplished, and we now need to follow all together in the right direction, and let's keep the momentum. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Zbyněk. And the briefest introduction, Commissioner, in the history of brief introductions. I would like to rapidly introduce the European Commissioner for Energy, Kadri Simson. Thank you very much. Give her a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
I do believe that you agree with me that this has been a truly impressive event, because bringing together more than 250 high-level participants to discuss the future of our grids by any standards, this is an achievement. And once again, my sincere thank you to ENTSO-E for organizing this event. And now we must keep up this momentum, and I'm going to be very pragmatic, and I tried to set some points, because all what I heard today here was about focusing on solutions. And what I heard that yes, the investment level will be a challenge, but also given that EU funds and public resources, they are limited. So we need to develop a broader range of financial instruments available to network operators and increase their access to financing. And it can only happen through a continued dialogue between industry and investors and promotional banks and EIB. And the first point I propose is to place these issues on the agenda of the upcoming EU Energy Investors Dialogue, and then at the Copenhagen Infrastructure Forum, so that we can come up with viable solutions. The financing issue is closely linked to regulatory dimension. I heard the arguments from the workshops in favor of a shift in tariff design, to have a more flexible, adaptive framework, including both capital and operating expenses. And this is what we propose in our reform of the electricity market design. Reinforce incentives for flexibility solutions, for example, but also anticipatory investments. And this will help us make the most efficient use of existing financial resources. And we will need a significant volume of infrastructure investment anyway. But we must also pursue solutions to make better and smarter use of existing grids through digitalization and flexibility. So my third point is to make progress as soon as possible on finalizing the reform of electricity market design, because we need to conclude this legislation before next year's elections. And in parallel, we have to conclude the work on the network code on smart grids. So we should also deliver on the commitment taken in the context of our digitalization of energy action plan, concluding the work on the creation of a digital twin of the electricity grid, which ENTSO-E and EU DSO have begun last December. We also discussed how we can connect the growing offshore wind capacity with mainland grid. And my next action point is that we need to provide more simplicity and clarity here. And I want to come forward by early next year with a guidance document on cost sharing. Electricity infrastructure is also a critical infrastructure, and we need to increase its resilience. By the end of the year, we need to deliver the network code on cybersecurity for the electricity sector and cross-border flows by the flows. And then there was a discussion about procurement and skilled labor force. We are talking a lot about scaling up manufacturing capacity and the skilled labor shortage. Well, visibility was there a recurrent word, and there is a lot to gain by giving manufacturers greater visibility and predictability on the pipeline of future grid reinforcement projects. As you know, right now at this very moment, we are receiving the current draft updates of national energy and climate plans. And we will stress this point also in our dialogue with member states, so that they can make their plans beyond 2030. We have also talked about how the private sector needs to lead a reskilling and upskilling. And finally, today's forum has once again highlighted the importance of fast and lean permitting and authorization rules, building trust and ensuring public support. And I do believe that we have already done a lot in this area, but what matters is implementation, and a lot happens at the national, local level. And what I see as priority for the Commission is to make sure that new RED III rules are in place by 1st of July next year with no delay. Finally, I also agree that there is much we can do without legislation. For example, early proactive engagement with all stakeholders at local and regional level. This will save us significant time and cost for litigation. And saying all that, I'm really grateful for very good conversations. I can assure you that European Commission and I myself and my team, we have put a strong focus on GREETs because they are emblematic of the broader challenges Green Deal faces. The challenge to move from targets, rules, frameworks to implementation, to make things happen on the ground. And that's why it is so important that we leave this forum with the willingness to continue our work jointly. The points I just mentioned come together as first sketch of the GREET action plan, a group of initial measures to step up the pace in the coming months. And I understand also that ENTSO-E will publish the conclusions in the coming days. And these documents will point us to where we need to work more and help build a more comprehensive agenda of actions. So, to conclude, our work has just begun. And I hope and I propose that we will take the stock of progress on all these points, not after a year, but already next year at the Copenhagen Forum. Because GREETs are now front and center of our agenda, and our future success depends on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I need 45 seconds of your time, if you'll permit me. I use the word permitting in its non-technical sense here. 3 things to tell you in 45 seconds before your lunch. Point 1, I outlined 2 aims at the start of this forum for all of us. Number 1, raise awareness about grids and their enabling role in the energy transition. We've done that. The second aim, provide targeted inputs into the EU-level ongoing policy discussions. That has been done too. So I can, on that basis, from what we've heard from our speakers, measure a degree of success in our event today. I hope there's been value for all of you as attendees, regardless of your role as a speaker or participant. That was number 1. Number 2, lunch is upstairs on level 4 now. And number 3, I declare this forum officially closed. Thank you.